Michelle A. Mapp is an attorney, a consultant, and a speaker with over 30 years of diverse professional experience in nonprofit, government, and education. Now she has her own law firm. She tells me why for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Michelle Mapp, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I appreciate it greatly. Needless to say, you're known here in the Low Country as an attorney, a consultant, and a public speaker with over 30 years of diverse professional experience in nonprofit, government, education, and the private sector. And with obviously your wealth of knowledge and a deep commitment to the practice of law, you've actually created your own law firm called Michelle A. Mapp, Attorney at Law, LLC. So tell me, Miss Michelle, why this law firm? Why now?
Yeah, when I went to law school, I did not go with the intentions of starting my own law firm. Very much went with the intention of wanting to be a lobbyist and really working in Columbia and changing, law from that perspective, from an advocacy perspective. But as I was doing that work, I began to get a lot of calls from family, friends, people here in the Low Country. And there were some current sort of common themes that I was seeing. Heirs property was a huge issue. So folks were losing their land or in jeopardy of losing their land. The whole issue of probate and navigating those issues, real estate planning, and what I began to see is sort of this common thread within the African American community, in particular in the Low Country, around the need for education and protection of assets. And so while we've made tremendous strides in terms of being able to start businesses or start nonprofits or buy a home or, acquire the real estate for our businesses, what I was seeing is that we were then losing it when it was time for it to be transferred to the next generation, or we were fighting over it as we navigated the probate process. And so I felt a calling to really kind of use my skills in this area. And I felt like it brought together everything I've learned, all the work that I've been able to do in my career.
And Ms. Michelle, what is the biggest difference about heirs property and real estate from an African American perspective from when you started law to right now?
Yeah, I think the big issue on the heirs property side is, I think sometimes just a lack of understanding of the need to probate an estate when someone dies. And so what often happens in more recent times is that someone dies and, their children or their grandchildren are living in the house and they feel like as long as I pay the mortgage or as long as I pay the taxes, everything is fine until it's no longer fine. And one of the heirs decides that, hey, people are selling houses for a lot in Mount Pleasant. We should sell this and get the money for it. And so then the fight ensues. Whereas I think in the past, for the older heirs property, oftentimes it was a protection mechanism where folks felt like if I don't have a will or if I don't probate, this is a way that we can keep this property in the family. And unfortunately, we are living in times where, one heir can force the sale of, the land and, bring forth a partition action. And we're seeing that more and more in regards to heirs property. I think the other thing with real estate that I see is just we are making strides in regards to acquiring real estate. I think what we need additional education on and understanding is, the need for legal advice around what's the best way to deed that property to ensure that it stays in our family, to ensure that, life happens, people die, should someone die, is it only in my name? And so therefore, if I die, then it has to go through the probate process. And if, my heirs can't agree, then, it can force the sale of the land and the division of the, asset. And so how do we, teach people about how to protect the assets that they are in fact acquiring?
And Miss Michelle, what other mechanisms should be in place to help those people protect those properties?
When you say other mechanisms, you mean from a legal perspective?
Oh yes, ma'am. Oh yes, ma'am.
Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, so, we should have estate plans. We should think about, wills and trust and what those, mechanisms do and how they can protect, our assets. A will, simply says, this is what I want to have happen with my assets when I die, but a will still has to go through the probate process. Whereas if you put your assets within a trust, if all of your assets are in fact within that trust, then you can bypass the probate process. I think the challenge is that people get a lot of information on the internet and on Facebook. And so I'll see a lot of misinformation where folks say, well, you shouldn't have beneficiaries on any of your accounts and you should put all that in a trust, when that in fact is not true. Anything that you can have a beneficiary on, you want to have a beneficiary on, because that then becomes a non-probate asset. It doesn't have to go through probate. What I tell folks is that where you really want to think about creating a trust, one, if you have minors, so, you don't want to leave $1 million insurance policy to, a 13-year-old, and the law's not going to allow that to happen. So in a case like that, you want to think about, okay, if something happens to me, what's going to be the mechanism for taking care of my children and ensuring that they can get to a stable point in their lives, get through college. So a trust is a good vehicle for that. And also, if you have a lot of assets that so you've invested in a lot of rental properties, for example, and so, creating a trust to then hold those properties so that it can continue being a wealth creation vehicle for your family. It's, owned by the trust, and you have someone who then becomes the trustee to manage that. So there's lots of, each case is unique, and you need to evaluate what assets you have to determine what's the best mechanism for you.
And what cases are you currently seeing in your office, or coming through your office, I should say?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Right now, I'm seeing a lot of nonprofits. As um, federal dollars are shrinking, nonprofits are trying to navigate, contracts that they have with the government. What happens if they've been receiving this funding and then all of a sudden they get a letter from the government saying it's no more. And so I'm seeing a lot of nonprofits across the state who are just trying to navigate what now? What does it mean for our nonprofit? What does it mean in terms of our sustainability? Or if we have to shut the door, how do we unwind as a nonprofit? Lots of contract issues. Unfortunately, oftentimes when someone reaches out to a lawyer is after there's a contract dispute, where I think it would be extremely helpful and less costly for folks if they would, seek legal advice when they're drafting a contract or negotiating a contract, to make sure that their interests are, protected. And so I think, unfortunately, we live in an age where folks feel like they can use, AI, and they can use Google to create a contract. And then when something goes wrong, then they seek legal advice, where it can then be a lot more costly to litigate, a contract dispute. And then, probate, estate, heirs property, which I see those as kind of being hand in hand. Oftentimes, someone's looking to either probate, the estate of someone who recently died, or it's an heirs property situation. And I always try to encourage those clients to think about, okay, if you want to avoid being, your family or your heirs being in this situation, now's a perfect time for us to get your estate plan in place, which is not just your will and trust. It's also looking at things like power of attorney, advance directive or a living will. What are those choices that you want to have happen at the end of life, and making sure that you write those things down so that your loved ones know, what decisions you want to have happen.
And so, Miss Michelle, if someone's in that particular situation right now, how do they contact you?
Yeah, the easiest way is just by calling our office. Our number is 854-300-5453. They can visit my website. It's michelleamapp.com. And I am on social media, so they can Google Michelle Mapp. I'm on all the social medias. So, but that's how they reach us. And then my email is just michelle@michelleamapp.com.
That is really, really amazing. I know you're busy, so I really do appreciate your time. But for right now, attorney and, of course, consultant and speaker, Michelle Mapp, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you, Quintin.
You're welcome.